Awesome. So we got the microphone set up this time. I'll just be kind of going in and out here. I'll try to explain what I'm doing as I'm going. Um, I'm not super talkative, and I don't really want to use this as an opportunity to just teach how to use Blender. There's definitely some concepts that are useful for you to learn, but I don't really think that teaching those myself is going to be very conducive. So let me go ahead and start getting our model set up here. I'm just going to import my objects, get the texture set up. I'm going to do my shaders in Blender just to make sure I can see everything properly. This specific model comes in two parts. One of them is kind of a base, and then the other one is a very large, deceptively large animated texture. So let's go ahead and get these textures set up. I'm going to go ahead and set up the shader for this FX material because we want the black is actually alpha. So all we got to do is open our shading view, plug in your alpha there to the bottom. Then you have to come over here to your blend mode, make sure that's on alpha blend. That looks a lot better. So I'm actually going to ignore adding the fade texture to my Blender material. It'll just end up looking a little bit better in-game, which I'll include some clips of. But you can kind of see this is that same kind of mesh where it's got really static edges. And if I go ahead and import the template armature here, I'm going to use the same armature template from the last one, but we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to take out the where'd it go? I'm going to take out the bobbing up and down, that slow animation. I really want it to move. We're just going to keep this as a static model sitting on the back. That's just going to keep everything looking nicer because, I'm sure you can kind of see on this specific model, this is another one of those where it's going to end up floating just a little bit behind the back. But I don't really see any reason why it would be moving up and down. So we're just going to kind of go for realism there. Misplaced my armature here for a second. Let me just import it from a different place. As you can see, the size is very, very wrong, but we can go ahead and fix that really quick. Let's take into account the direction that these wings are facing and make sure that's aligned properly. Go ahead and scale these down. Now these wings are going to be a little large in terms of proportional size. I could reduce the size a little bit. I'm not sure if that's going to produce results that I like, though. Because you got to think proportionally to the spell that you are using as a template if you're going to do something like that. You know, you can build your own armature if you set the bone names correctly. You know, you got to have bone 0, bone 1, make sure you set up your roots, key bones, that sort of thing. I think we'll just make this a little bit bigger. I like the idea of affixing this to a different proportion. I think that's a good size right there. Let's go ahead and get it lined up a little bit just off the back. We want it to be just behind this section where that usually means the back of the player. So I think this is going to be perfect right here. I did this in the last video too. You can view texture animation with these TT controllers. You can kind of see how that's making this texture over here animate. And I'll show you how to set that up on another mesh. I'm going to go ahead and delete these particles. We're not going to need that at all. And you can see right here, this is how you assign that texture transform. It isn't called this in the actual modifiers. Let me show you. When you add it, it's going to be under UV warp, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, I believe so. Just pick the UV map and basically just going to copy the data here. You set your target object, which is the FX. We're going to grab that from the TT controller. Let's give that a try. As you can see, it's not quite animating like I'd like it to. This is probably a UV map thing, because it's actually making it disappear in some cases. It is a little bit awkward looking. It's not really what I expected. There we are. Make sure you apply those transforms. And you can kind of see this is not quite the direction that we want, but it's already going the direction that we like. We want it to move outwards. And you can see here, this is a much better example. Let me go ahead and just turn on that animation. You can kind of see I'm going to need to flip these keyframes around in order to get it to animate in the proper direction. But these edges here are what we're going to use that blend override for. I've already got an image, and I'll show that to you guys before we get finished up, that image that we're going to use as the blend texture. And you can usually set that up as a second image on this material, but again, I really don't want to go through all the effort of setting up Blender shaders. It's just not really worth the time, since anything from the actual shader info doesn't get exported onto the M2. All you're going to be looking for is stuff like these blend modes, and on top of that, this section. That's where you're going to get all of your effects and things generated. So let's go ahead and weight the new mesh to the previous armature. You can actually look at the vertex groups of this and see that there aren't any, which is sort of correct. I'm going to go ahead and weight these to bone 0, which is this bone down here. You can kind of see it bob up and down a little bit. This is supposed to be weighted to the bone. I don't think it needs to be, just because of the way that its animations are handled, but you'll see what I mean once we get there. So I'm just going to go over here, make a vertex group on each. Other times you might want to do a data transfer and then clean up the weights from there, but in this situation I don't really think that's necessary. I'm just going to really quickly paint the town red here. Perfect. Let's grab the bigger mesh. Just paint right over it. Always normalize your weights. Don't lock them. Only lock them if it's necessary, like if you're trying to make an edit where you don't want one specific group to change. That's always been a really useful tool whenever you are doing weight paints. Like, say I needed to make each of these blades weighted differently, but I still wanted the main part to be locked as fully red. What you can do is just paint each blade. Doesn't matter if you spill onto this middle part. Go to that vertex group, make sure it's red, and normalize and lock it. I'm not sure if I explained that in any comprehensible way. You know, there's just certain little tricks that you can use to get around this sort of thing. Make sure your modifiers are always organized. It really does have a big effect on the way that these are set up, because whether or not you see it do that, the effects are mostly applied while you are exporting it. Armatures are not quite the same as this UV warp, but if you have something like solidify, decimate, anything like that set up, the modifier is technically applied when you export it, so the order of the applications matter. And you can actually see once I weighted it, it is kind of bobbing up and down now, but this is a good chance for us to go ahead and go back and take care of these animation keyframes. And since we've already got it weighted, I'm going to go ahead and delete that old mesh. We don't need it anymore. So let's go into our animation, and first I'm going to grab the TT controller. I did the same thing here last time. World of Warcraft is usually more forgiving with keyframes that are multiples of 5. I don't know if you saw that, but where this is set right now is in between 2 keyframes. Blender's not really going to let you mess with that by default, so I like to just move things to where they are going to be accepted by both formats. And so if you see the location here, I'm just going to change that to 1, and then insert my keyframes. I'm pressing I, all channels. So now we have the TT controller moving in the proper direction. Let's go back to the armature. Open our action editor for this global sequence. This is the bone that I'm animating, bone 0 that it's moving up and down on. I'm going to do the same thing, grab my keyframes, move them back here to 85. We're going to go ahead and reset the position of this, because you can see it's still kind of moving around. Actually, I didn't even catch that. The ending keyframe is exactly where it's supposed to be. It's the starting keyframe that has it moved it all the way to the back. Oh, never mind, it's this one. And so actually, if I just go ahead and delete those 2 keyframes, that'll make it stop moving. Cool beans. Switch back to our layout view. We've got the proper direction of the animation now. This is good. Let's go ahead and make sure we've got our transforms applied. We're seeing the true nature of this. Let's go ahead and make sure we've got that parented. Got our TT controller, everything's set up here. So it took us about 15 minutes. We got the new model imported. We got everything set up with the new armature. So now we're just going to spend some time configuring the materials, the textures, all that sort of thing. And one thing I did want to point out, it's always good to open up the Blender file view and just make sure you don't have any like extra objects sitting around. Everything in here is the same, but I'm thinking over here where it says scene, I think I might have 1 or 2 things sitting around that I don't want. Definitely clean up your images, clean up your meshes. See, there's this cube here for no reason. We're not going to need either of these. And there's a lot of images that we're not going to need either. We're going to go ahead and get rid of those now, just so we don't have to deal with those being exported by accident. We just like to keep it clean. Let's set up our new materials. I'm going to go ahead and name them just to make everything easier. So let's call this Moon Wings. And there. Make everything a little easier to see. So we've got our two materials. Let's start with Moon Wings. We are going to set the base texture. I keep my wings in spells wings. That's going to be moonwings.blp. Let's take a look at our render flags for this one. We're using a solid object. I don't think I want to keep it unlit or anything like that. This one I'm not really going to have that many issues with. Blending, not really going to mess with it. It's opaque, pretty simple. Now, this one is where we're going to end up doing a lot more of the work. We already have our texture animation set up. Now we just need to get the blend mode override set up. And so you see there's this texture 2 field down here. That's where we're going to end up importing that. And I'm just going to open the file from here. I'll grab my fade. You kind of see this is the texture. And if you look, it's actually mid animation right now. Let me bring this back. You can see how the edges are nice and faded on this specific image. And so that's essentially going to be the mask that it uses for alpha. So let's switch this back to the correct texture. Go back to my M2 components. This one is going to be alpha because you want that transparency. Let's make it unlit because I want it to have kind of a glowing sort of look. You know, this is going to be a source of light rather than something that light affects. So we're going to go ahead and make it unlit. It's going to be two-sided because these are just flat planes. They're also bent planes, very similar to Inico's D3 wings. Even the actual movement texture is a little bit similar too. But we will get there. I don't think we need to Z-write or anything like that, but let's go ahead and get the second texture set up. I think they'll both be on the first UV map. Let me double check because I don't even think this thing has a second UV map. Yeah, I didn't think so. So I think in that case it's either going to duplicate it for me or it'll assign that. I really haven't played with these settings too much, so I'm definitely learning a little bit here too. I think this might have to be add if I'm not mistaken. Darkening, alpha. It's definitely not alpha key. I don't know if it's modulate. Applying the material against pixels of background. You know, I can actually answer this in full. Let me take a look at my example that I made before. thought add would be the answer. Because this is how that blend mode override is going to happen. When you have two textures on the same material that have different blend modes, that's how that override happens. If I just went ahead and set this to alpha, that override wouldn't be happening. So let's go ahead and set these up. Let's get my render flags. This one I think is going to be depth right, if I'm not mistaken. We'll give it a shot and we'll re-export it if we have to. But for the most part, I think this is good. We don't need another material. Let's go ahead and set up our textures. Oh, I didn't add the path for these two. I'm just going to copy this because those are going to be generally the same. This one is just FX. And then I've named the other one. Grab the wrong image. How did that happen? This other one is just FX underscore. Call that one fade. Make sure we have our transparency set. I cannot tell you, I've literally never used anything other than transparency 0. I don't know what it'd be useful for. I guess if you're taking the entire image and making it a certain one, I don't know. Oh, see, you gotta make sure, maybe I'm just a stickler, but I like to make sure these are kind of put in order like you're using them. Same order as here. Alrighty. I think that's just about it. Let me make sure this one doesn't need to be two-sided. Go ahead and grab our geosets. Let's see, I don't have any attachments or anything like that. This one's fairly simple. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Put it in our project folder here. Save that Blender file. And I'm going to go ahead and try to give this an export and see what we're looking at. Looks like I did not give one a material for some reason. Let me look at that console screen again. Material texture 1 is none. Ah, see. I thought I was dumb. I'm going to go ahead and add a second material here. Just nodes. And I'm going to be a good boy and set this up like I'm supposed to. And I don't really remember too much how to that should cover it. It's getting mad at me. Let's go back to our view here. We've got our M2 materials set up. I was looking for texture 1. Did I leave one in the Blender file? Is that what happened? Nope. I don't think I need to do it like this. If I'm not mistaken, it should just be set up already. Let me try doing this again. Because I put them both under the same. I'm curious which mesh it's getting mad at me over. Empty textures. this one all set up. Add patch compatible. I don't think I need to sit here and set up texture twos because this is the field that it's looking for. Oh! I did not see that. That makes a little more sense. Well shit, where the fuck are they then? That's weird. There's only like 9,000 extra meshes in here now. That definitely doesn't need to be there either. You know what? I bet that's what the issue was. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's what I thought. Let's check the console and make sure. Let's see. Objects, animation items. Cool. Yeah, there really weren't that many errors there either. Took us about 25 minutes to get one model. So I'm going to pause my recording while I take a look at the actual model here. I'm going to keep Blender open for a second. I'm still here. Back in World of Warcraft. Looks like my blend mode I set up incorrectly. You can see the texture on the little main piece is correct. I think I'm going to want to set up that to be two-sided because I think I'm looking through some sides here. But that's no matter. I'm not sure if this is animating because everything's kind of hiding underneath. It's blended together. I can't really see. Let's go back and get this fixed. And we'll see how that looks. Okay, so we're back in Blender. There were a couple issues that I had to solve. I think you guys might have noticed when I was trying to export it here, I was having an issue where there was a mesh that didn't have a material assigned properly. If you caught it, I went over here to the Blender file and I actually found a little stray mesh sitting over here. All I had to do was delete that. Issues subsided. All we're trying to figure out now is really just this bigger mesh, because it looks like it's animated, it looks like I have everything set up, but for some reason it's completely transparent in game. And why can't I scroll? Oh, there it goes. Okay. I'm assuming it's something to do with the blend modes that I've gotten set up. I don't think it needs to be depth writing, but I could be wrong. Let's go ahead and set it up to depth write. And I'm pretty sure alpha is correct. Maybe I'm going to keep it on add because I should see the fade texture at the very least. I should see something. Last time it was completely transparent. So we added depth right. I really don't think that's going to fix it though. We definitely don't want the main mesh to be opaque or anything like that. Let me go ahead and actually set that to the second UV map like it's supposed to. And I'm just going to copy this UV map and make a new one. Let's see here, UV. We need to add a second layout. Shit, how do you do that? I swear I've done this before. I'm gonna go crazy. How the fuck do you add another one? See, this is why it's important to learn Blender. Sitting here like, oh man, I forgot how to make another UV map. I'm looking at it. Okay, but as you can see, both of them are the same, and we do want 2 UV maps for that one. So that should be better. Let's go ahead and export it and give that another try. I will see you guys back in World of Warcraft. Okay, we're back in World of Warcraft. Let me make sure the folks in Discord can see it. Yes, I'm using a Trinity repack. Do not look at me like that. Hey! Alright, so this is exactly what we were looking for. If you're seeing this fade on the edge, we've got the blend mode override activated. You can kind of see a little bit of messiness out there, but we'll get that fixed. However, you'll notice that the texture is not animating, which is okay. We can go back and fix that. That's not too much of a problem, but we have made some progress, and we got a nice fade going there on the edges. That's perfect. Alright, we're back in Blender, and we have everything else set up in terms of the actual materials. We've got our blend override added, so now we just need to go back and make sure that our texture transforms are happening. I'm trying to see if I can figure out exactly why it's not wanting to bring it in for me. I'm like 90% positive there's one setting I'm not messing with that I should be. Should be like M2 texture transform somewhere. I thought it was under the material settings. Here we go again, looking for settings where I should know where they are. Hang on. Can you see it? Can you see where the stupid is? It's right here. That is the stupid. Happens too often. This is why it's so important to know Blender beforehand, because obviously like 90% of my knowledge is self-taught. So it's just stupid little things. You're going to be doing so much trial and error with these sorts of things. You just never really know how that's going to go. Actually, let me double check, because from what I was seeing before, it was showing me that all of the actual texture animation blocks were empty. And yeah, see, that's kind of what I'm seeing in the M2 file. So I'd like to see if exporting it with this flag will fix that, because that's one thing I said to the developer of this build when it came out last. So I was like, oh, I'm having a little bit of trouble. I had to go into O&O and fix something. But I don't think that's the case. I think I just didn't set that flag right here. I'm going to keep you guys on the line here. I'm going to reload my file, run the template. See, I'm still not seeing texture animation under the lookup table. Let's see if I can figure out how to noodle this out. Conventional wisdom would tell me that there's a flag I'm missing somewhere. Oh, I think I see. Is it this? We're gonna find out. Let's go ahead and export. Take a look in O&O. Yep, that's exactly what it is. Just make sure you set up this UV transform, and I'm gonna compare that to the actual texture block. You go to your lookup table, and I can actually see. Yes. I'm curious what texture is putting on those two. Gotcha. Yep, this is correct. Everything here is good. Let me go ahead and switch over to ONO so I can show you guys what I'm talking about. Let me export the other file here. This part actually isn't in the stream at all. I'm going to close a couple of these, just make sure they're out of the way. But I've got the most recent export here where I fixed the flags, and I'm showing you what I'm talking about down here in this texture animation lookup. As long as you see a 0, that means the texture is going to be animated. And now that refers to the texture animation that you reference over here, this one. And so it's kind of a chain. You're going to look at the texture animation lookup and see which ones are and aren't animated. Then you compare that to the lookup table for the textures, because that's going to be different from the actual list of textures. You can see I've only got 3 textures, but I've got 4 in the lookup. That's because one of my materials is only using 1, so it doesn't need the blend override here because it's using the same texture twice. But you can see how this override is set up. If I can pull up the skin file really quick. If we come down here to our texture units, should be this first one. We've got a texture count of 2. We start on 0, and we are using texture animation lookup 0. Obviously, it's going to start on 2 down here because that's our second material. So if you think about it, we're using these 2 textures, which is 0 and 1 as per the textures here. That's going to be the color and the fade, respectively. And so that's how that's going to animate as well. Our color is going to animate, but the fade is going to stay still. That's exactly what we want. And so this new mapping up here that you're seeing, this 4, that refers to the actual blend mode. That's add. Not too sure what this first one means. I usually put 1 there whenever I've done this manually, but that's probably more right because developers, that's not me, right? So let's go ahead and make sure these are saved. Everything's set up like we want. We're going to run over to World of Warcraft, give this one more try. I've started back up. Get the stream going. Got sound. Cool. And so, haha, still going the wrong way, but that's definitely something we can fix too. We can actually do that in ONO or in Blender itself. But it's looking better. I don't know if you can see it, but there's actually a little stutter here. That's because my global sequence isn't matching the actual length of the animation. I can fix that. It's really not too much of a problem. And you can actually set the global sequence equivalent to the last keyframe, and you can find that in ONO. I'll show you where. But yeah, we're getting closer. Just gotta make sure we add that 2-sided flag on the main piece. As you can see, it isn't really floating up and down much. It's just floating down as much as it's connected to this little piece on the back. Gotta flip that around, fix the global sequence, add 2-sided. Not too bad. Okay. If it'll frickin' let me, there we go. So you can kind of see it's animating correctly here, but it goes the other way. That's because of the Z up system. I don't know. World of Warcraft uses a different coordinate system. It's fucking annoying. But let's run down to our animation block where we have the TT controller. We're just going to put that back where it was and insert my keyframes. Run back to layout. Perfect. And so let's see here. If I'm not mistaken, I can actually edit the length of the global sequence in here somewhere. I'm really thinking it's just going to be easier to do in ONO, and I'll record that. I don't think I'll be able to stream it unless I just add it really quick, but I can just add it really quick. So let's run over to this material, make sure that one is 2-sided. Perfect. And there was one more small issue. Oh, it was just the direction. Cool, we got all that fixed. Export this guy one last time. Perfect. Let's transition to ONO again. Recording. And so the way I like to do these global sequences is I'll go into the texture animation block. Let's check the values for the translation. I need the timestamps. Alright, and so you see this second timestamp, 3188. That's what we're going to set our global sequence to. See, it's just a little bit longer. And actually, I like that global sequence a little bit better because WoW really does work in threes. So instead, I'm going to change the length of the texture animation to match. I think that's a better plan. Perfect. Cool, we got all that set up. I don't think there's any edits I need to do under the skin file. But let's go ahead and just drop these in. Oh, wait, I gotta edit the other file as well. See, I like to go ahead and drop some of my new models on top of templates that I've made before, so I can just drag and drop that in, and I don't have to mess with, making any database edits. I don't have to, make any CSV files, anything like that. I can just drag and drop, give it a test. I really don't like to look at that sort of thing in WoW Model Viewer because it never shows it right. But I'm just going to do the same thing to this second file, take the global sequence, and set that as the value for the second timestamp. Sometimes there's more in here. It depends on the actual animation. I'm just going to leave it like that. And let me transition back to World of Warcraft. Yes, I'm using a shitty Trinity Core repack. I'm sure it's not shitty. I didn't mean it like that. Ah, there we go. Perfect. I think we've just about hit everything. The main mesh in the back is looking a little bit more solid. I think two-sided was definitely the way to go there. We have the blend mode set up. We've got our texture animation, and I'm not seeing any choppiness with the global sequence or anything like that. So I'd say this one is a pretty good success. It definitely took me a little bit less time. I think that was only like 45 minutes, maybe 50. I'm not too sure.